A murder trial in Minot saw an attorney take the stand today. Not one of the assigned attorneys in the case, but as a witness. Kyle Craig testified for the state. Craig agreed to take on 22-year-old Alex Eckert's custody case when Eckert came to him. Eckert, who prosecutors say was fatally shot by 26-year-old Heather Hoffman, had signed an agreement that gave up his parenting rights, and Craig indicated Eckert did not realize the extent of it.
He was upset, tearful, very, very distraught. From what I could tell, he did not comprehend those terms.
During Craig's testimony, the courts played a lengthy audio recording of a confrontation between Hoffman and Eckert, where Hoffman berates Eckert and accuses him of not paying his share of child support. On cross, Hoffman's attorney Stephen Moninger pressed Craig on the nature of the recording.
The audio recording contains no threats of physical harm, does it?
Ms. Hoffman says, "I will break your jaw off," and I consider that to be a threat.
Not the first time people have had arguments over custody and child support, correct?
This was one of the more severe ones I've listened to.
Hoffman faces the chance of life in prison without parole if she is convicted. Testimony is expected to resume Monday morning.